This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host.
Welcome everyone. This is the Meaningful Sport podcast, and I am your host, Noora Ronkainen. Meaningful Sport is a series of discussions on the why and how involvement in sport and physical activity can be an important part of a life worth living. If you are interested in the theme, you might also want to check out meaningfulsport.com. There you can find podcast show notes, read a blog, and access many resources for further explorations of meaningful sport. Welcome back to listening to our discussion with Sam Jarman. Sam played professional golf for about 10 years before transitioning to coaching and specializing in the mental side of the game. In the second part, we move to exploring the spiritual dimension of sport. What is awareness? What is meaning? And also discuss the mental health crisis in sport. You'll find links to the works we are discussing in the podcast show notes. If you didn't listen to the first part already, I recommend you to do so. And either way, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Let's move on to spirituality. So that was something that you brought up, and that's not a traditional topic of sports psychology, at least. And I've done some research on that, and my education is in theology. So I was interested in these experiences when I started studying sports, and I was interested in this idea about everyday spirituality and how we can find this spiritual dimension in our mundane activities, cleaning our house or going for a run or doing these things that happen outside of the church or any sacred space and so forth. But so we clearly share this interest in understanding the spiritual dimension of sport and how spiritual traditions can help us understand what is going on in sport. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about how you approach spirituality and a bit about your spiritual journey then as well.
Yeah, sure. Could you give us if you've got a theology qualification or a theology, you know more about theology than I do. How would you define spirituality?
Yeah, so I think we certainly have different ways to do that. So some of the organized religions would still see spirituality as the personal part of religion or the experiential part of religion, whereas then, for example, in the existential thought, you would more often talk about spiritual dimension as something that exists in all people, whether you are part of any religion or any of that. And that's the more this existentialist thought that I'm drawn on, and the spiritual dimension that is in all of us, whether we are aware of that or not.
Yeah. Okay. So my sort of definition would be really sort of simple. It's basically the idea that there are aspects of reality that are not physically determined, that play a role in the material world. That's kind of how we all know if there is a material world, and I would question that. But let's assume that we're talking to somebody who's living in that paradigm. Most people would sort of have this feeling that there is something more to life than just physicality, than just material things. Now, whether they express that in terms of a religion or a spiritual practice of some sort, or, I would say for a lot of people, sport is a spiritual experience for them. And to me, this is, it's a great place to start talking about this, because it's the why do you play sport question, and pretty quickly people will get to some sort of expression of the spirituality of what it is they're doing, and So I've already said that, you know, all of the spiritual traditions and religions have this same sort of basic fundamental idea at the core, which is that who we really are is not a body and a mind. The body and the mind are known by something. They don't know anything. So the fundamental question, well, what is the nature of that knowing? What is the nature of that awareness? If I ask somebody a question, are you aware? What are they going to say? So if I ask you, Nora, are you aware? What are you going to say?
That would be Heidegger's first thing, what distinguishes human beings from other animals that are out here, that we are aware of our existence and our existence is an issue for us.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, isn't there? We are aware. If I say to somebody, "Are you aware?" Most people would eventually, usually they ask me, aware of what, and I'd say no, not the content of your experience. We're talking about the nature of your experience. So, are you aware? Most people would say yes. So, what that tells us is that when we say the words "I am," we're not referring to. That's what we're referring to. We're referring to awareness. We're referring to consciousness. We're not referring to the body and the mind. If I say to somebody, again, it's a process of stripping away. If I say to somebody, do you say I am a body or I have a body? Most people would say the second one. They say I have a body. And if I said to you, well, look, are you your body? What would you say?
I think from phenomenological perspective, many scholars are very much arguing for I am a body, that there is no, our experience happens through our body, and that's the way that we are connected to the world, or we are in the world. But I would certainly agree with you that if you ask people I am my body or I have a body, people would say that I have a body, and I think these moments when there's something wrong with your body, you will most certainly say that, I have a whatever injury in my ankle. So that would be body as an object.
Yeah. So if I said, if I had an accident, say I lost a finger or something, I wouldn't feel any less me than I did before I had the accident. If I lost an arm, if it was a really bad accident, I would still refer to myself as I. I would still say I am, and my sense of self would not be diminished by the loss of part of my body. I don't go into mourning when I cut my toenails or have a haircut or whatever. It's just that's not me. So in that sense, the body is more like. It comes in the same ontological category as your car or your house. It's where you live. It's not you. So again, we're back to this idea that who we really are is awareness. It's consciousness. And the religious word for that is God. So when we talk about the spiritual side of sport and the spiritual side of life, that's all we're pointing to. It's the most mundane, most normal, most ordinary experience is being aware of being aware, essentially. It's knowing that who you are is the awareness of, not the content of that experience, it's just the awareness of it. That's who you are. That's who we're referring to when we say the words I am. And once you get that clear in your mind, and for many people that to them is a moment of enlightenment, it's a moment of realization, that changes everything, because you can then start to explore the nature of that. You start to explore whether that awareness, who you really are, well, is that limited? Is it finite? Can it be hurt by any of the things that happen within that experience, or is it the same? Has awareness changed from the moment when you were 5 years old to the moment that you were 10 years old, to the moment you were 20 years old, to the moment you were 90 years old? Most people would say no. They would still feel that they'd still say the words I am. They'd still feel that they were the same person. Now, their body will have changed massively in that time. It's probably renewed itself, over a lifetime. The body renews itself several times over, but the sense of I and the sense of I am remains. That remains the constant. And that's essentially what a life is. A life is just a series of experiences connected by this sense of I. That's it. But what we do, if we're not careful, is we mistake it for the physical entity of the body, and we believe that that's who we really are, or we mistake it for the story of who we think we are, which is the ego. And we believe that that is our true nature, and it's not. Neither of those things are true. Both of those things are known by something. Both of those things occur within awareness and are known by that awareness. So that's essentially what we're pointing to. And when you get that clear in your mind, it opens up a massive opportunity to, as I say, to look at the world differently. Because if that's true for me, then it's probably going to be true for you. And it's probably going to be true for the 7 billion other people on this planet. And if I can't find a limit to my awareness, well, you probably can't find a limit to your awareness. So what does that tell us? It means that actually there is only one awareness, there is only one consciousness. And we are not 7 billion different individual consciousnesses. There is one consciousness and 7 billion different perspectives from that consciousness. And that puts, all the conflict in the world and all the problems that we have in relationships and the insecurities we have about our personal well-being and these existential questions, that puts a completely different viewpoint on those. And that to me seems to be a much better place to end up at, rather than constantly trying to put elastoplasts and coping strategies and mental techniques on top of our thoughts and our feelings, because those worries and those insecurities just don't make sense anymore.
Yeah, I will move us now to the context of mental health in sports. So what you're talking about, coping strategies and perhaps putting plasters in wounds, and one of the texts that I found in your website and that I enjoyed reading was when you are addressing the mental health issues in sport. I keep coming back to these questions because we really have some outrageous reports and numbers from elite sport in terms of how many athletes are struggling with their mental health.
Indeed.
And so you are pointing out that we are not simply talking about the medical problem here, but we are talking about the philosophical or spiritual problem that we are facing in our sport. So can you develop that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So again, we come back to what is mental health. Well, to me, it seems that the same. We can draw a parallel with our physical health. So if I'm not worried about how I'm feeling, how my body's feeling, then I would consider myself to be physically healthy. And if I'm not worried about how my mind is feeling, if you want to put it like that, then I could describe myself as mentally healthy. So, unfortunately, what we've done is we've gone down the process of medicalizing mental health and seen it as something that has to be fixed. And whether that's with, as I say, coping strategies or with medication, we're just looking at it from the wrong perspective. Most of the worries and fears and insecurities and anxieties that not just athletes but human beings have in general are born out of an existential fear. It's like, what's going to happen to me? Why does the situation and the circumstances of my life make me feel like this? And as I say, that philosophical conversation asking, well, who am I? Once you start to see that who you really are is consciousness rather than a physical entity, well, all of a sudden those problems don't exist anymore because you're not worried about them. It's just it just becomes a non thing. And as I say, that's quite I wouldn't just come out with that with somebody, especially if somebody was suffering. But that's the way to come to a lasting peace and a lasting happiness and lasting well-being. And it's why people find solace and comfort in religions or spiritual practice, because they're moving away from this idea that their essence, who they really are, is physical and can be harmed or damaged or impaired by their situational circumstances, by life. And once you get out of that, you're free.
Yeah, would you agree with some of the philosophers, or I guess sociologists as well, who would talk about the more collective existential crisis of our time that we know in for example, European context, many of the religions are, losing their people are no longer members of religions, but we also might not have like a alternative spiritual perspective or this framework of meaning that can give like a foundation to our lives. So maybe we are collectively a little bit lost about what life is about and what is a good thing to do in this life.
Definitely. And I think the religions have been a lot of religions have lost their way over the years. They've become obsessed with the practices and the rituals and the words of the faith, whichever faith it is. So they've become obsessed with the signpost and forgotten what the signpost is pointing to. And it's not helped. I think, again, part of it is the obsession with science, and in order to understand the religious message, you have to take it metaphorically, not literally. And unfortunately, both atheists and religious fundamentalists, they're falling for the same misunderstanding. They're taking the religious message or religious text literally, not metaphorically. And at one extreme, that means you act on every word that's in that particular book, and you use that to justify some pretty horrendous things. And on the other hand, you dismiss it completely because it's not scientific and it can't be proved. So it's the same misunderstanding, but you've drawn two different conclusions from it. And in order to understand any religion or anything spiritual, you have to what we are pointing to, whether you call it awareness, consciousness, God, oneness, you can't describe it. It can't be described literally. You have to point to it metaphorically. The moment that this is why the sages, Ramana Maharshi and these ancient sort of sages would say that silence is the only way of communicating this, because the moment you open your mouth, you've made a concession. It's not what it is, because you can't describe it in words. You can't describe consciousness. You can only know it firsthand. And that's the thing about, and as I say, just conscious, that God is just another word for consciousness. But unfortunately, because of, I doubt there's a more loaded word in the English language than God. And the way I see it is nobody can tell you what that word means. If you feel resistance when somebody speaks about religion or speaks about God, it's because you've taken on somebody else's meaning for that word, which is ludicrous because nobody can prove what it means. So if you're having a negative reaction to that, if that word makes you feel bad, if it makes you feel angry, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, if it makes you feel upset, well, you've made up or you've adopted somebody else's meaning for it and allowed a non-provable thing to make you feel bad. Well, that's nuts. So religion is a tricky one. some people have a very deep faith and gain a massive amount of spiritual fulfillment from that, and for other people are very resistant to it. It makes them feel uncomfortable, and they have some very, very negative thoughts and feelings about it. But it's not the religion itself; it's the meaning that we've attached to the words that's causing those feelings.
Yeah, and when we opened the whole discussion about spirituality, and you asked about how I might define that, and I would ask how you would define that in return. And I mean, we are talking about something that is such an elusive concept, and I love the way that some of the Eastern philosophies, or some would call them religions, like Taoism or Zen Buddhism, that they put it out there that if we are trying to describe this with the language we have, we end up distorting things.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
the way that can be described is not the way, for example, in Taoism.
Yeah, exactly.
So we might have some idea about what we are talking about, but how we bring words to that always also depends on our cultural frameworks of meaning and the words that we have available.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just to add, like one thing I find quite difficult when I've done some of this research in the Finnish context, where actually you don't even have like a good distinction between the words religious and spiritual.
Okay, that's interesting.
So that makes it, or you have words, one word is something more like mental,
right,
or psychological,
yeah,
and the other one is more like religious. And people think that if I'm talking about something like spirituality, I'm referring to religion, and they might just close the discussion by saying that, I don't go to the church.
Yeah,
that's not like a relevant thing. So it's very difficult, and also in the Nordic countries, religion is something that is a very private thing for people. So you can ask them about all sorts of things, but if you ask about spirituality, you are being like invading a very private domain.
But I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. It is private.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is, again, this is the part of religion where they say it is a personal relationship with God. But all that is my way of saying that would be being aware of being aware.
Mm-hmm.
We're pointing to exactly the same intuition, one using religious language and one using secular language. That's all that meditation is. Meditation is just being aware of being aware. But the religious word for it would be prayer. So it's the same. It's like happiness. It's the same feeling. Every human being would know that feeling, but we'd all have different words for it, which is why words are inherently dualistic. They're part of this subject-object relationship that we have with the world. They can just invoke a feeling or an intuition in us, and that's why when we have a realization, we call it an aha moment, because there isn't a word to describe it, but we all know the feeling of truly understanding something, or whether it's how to hit a particular golf shot, or whether it's how to do a quadratic equation, or how to paint a particularly do a particular style of painting or photography or whatever it is. It's that moment of you can't put it into words, but that's just the realization of true nature. It's the same whether it's whether it's love, whether it's beauty, or it's truth. A moment of understanding. It's the same feeling, it's the same intuition, and that's what we're pointing to. And as I say, the religious word for that would be where I found God.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that you are doing this work of bringing more words to these experiences. That, for example, in sport, many of us have this intuitive sense that something is going on in our sport experience that is not concentration or mental toughness or optimal zone of functioning, but it's probably something beyond that. But for example, in sports psychology discourse and the words that we use, there doesn't seem to be something that helps to capture this something that is going on.
No, because it's seen from sports psychology, it's seen as a doing rather than a being. So when you're in the zone, you are experiencing your true nature. So the ego has disappeared. There's no sense of self. There's no sense of there's no I thought there. It's just being in the present moment and having that experience. Whereas a sports psychologist, because they don't understand the nature of consciousness, a lot of them, they would believe that you were doing that, and it's not. It's just a being. So that to me is all the zone is. It's just the total absence of self-consciousness. It's the absence of a person. It's just dropping back into true nature, and yeah, you just are.
I will let you go in a second. I know that it's a beautiful morning there, and you will be playing golf.
I'm not in any hurry, so yeah. If you've got more questions, then please.
I would like to bring our discussion to the 2 books that you have written, and those are a wonderful resource for our listeners to get to know your philosophy and your thinking around golf. But so for our podcast, when the theme of the podcast is meaningful sport, finding meaning in your sport practices, what would be some of the aspects that you would lift from your 2 books that might help our listeners to explore these questions about meaning a bit further? Terrible question, I guess.
No, it's a great question. It's a really fair question. Look, I wrote the first book 5 years ago, and I wrote the second book about 18 months, nearly 2 years ago. So my thinking has moved on. I think both of the books are fine in terms of what they offer, and they will definitely give some insights into how your mind works, and particularly with the second one, will probably start helping you with the stripping away process. So it's basically about examining the some of the beliefs and the misunderstandings that we have around the game of golf and around performance. But I'm writing another book at the moment. I'm probably writing two other books at the moment that are going to be more in line with where my thinking is at now.
Let's talk about them in a second. So you can first tell what you've already done, and then what is next is the follow-up question for that. Yeah.
Okay. So the first book, my big realization from the first book, the 3 Principles book, was that my feelings weren't coming from my situational circumstance; they were coming from my thinking. Which is it sounds trivial, but for me that was massive, because I suddenly stopped being a victim of my situation and my circumstances. So I stopped believing that it was the golf tournament or the bad shot or the 3-putt or the fact that I'd missed a cut that was making me feel the way that I was feeling, because that's genuinely what it looked like, and that's genuinely what most people believe, is that the situational circumstances of their lives is what's making them feel the way they feel. And the moment that you see that actually, one day you can be coming down the last 3 holes in a golf tournament and be feeling uncomfortable and insecure and nervous, and the following day you can be coming down the same stretch of holes in a similar situation and feel fine, should tell you that it's not the situation that's making you feel the way that you feel. So that was sort of the first big sort of realization that I had. And then the second one was this question about who am I, and the just seeing that the first situation was great because I realized it wasn't the golf tournament that was making me feel the way that I felt, but I still felt crap in a lot of situations. So it was a relief to know that it wasn't the golf tournament, but I still didn't feel great. So it was only when I had the sort of second realization of it wasn't the thinking. it wasn't my thinking about the tournament that was the problem. It was my misunderstanding about who I was, the thinking about who, the I thought that was the problem. So that's more of what I'm pointing to in the second book, which is this, as I say, this realization that the moment you take the I thought out of any situation, you're free, basically, and you can just let go and play.
And that helps you to find a different meaning around the role of sport in your life. Yeah,
definitely. And the other thing is when you come from that perspective of knowing who you really are, you can see that meaning can change from moment to moment, and that's fine. We have this idea of meaning that it's got to be set in stone, and I don't think that's true for anybody. A sport will mean something different from when you're a kid to when you're a teenager to when you're a young professional to when you're coming to the end of your career to when you're retired and maybe back playing for fun again. So the meaning of sport in your life will change massively. That's only a problem if you define yourself by that meaning. If you understand that who you really are has nothing to do with that meaning, then all of a sudden all of that goes away.
Yeah. And how about your second book, Take Relief? What are the insights and how did your thinking develop towards that?
Yeah, well, that book's more about the sort of second point that I made there about the I thought. That's sort of the more, and it comes at it. It's a kind of as I say, that one of the sort of ways that you can explore this is by, as I say, asking, stripping away these ideas and beliefs that you have about yourself, and that the book basically starts you on that process by stripping away the ideas and the thoughts you have about what you need to do in order to play your best golf. We accumulate these ideas about these routines or visualizations or decision making or breathing techniques, whatever it is. We hear all these things from other people, and we kind of adopt them without really seeing whether they work in our own direct experience. So it's just a process of reassuring people that actually you can let go a lot of these beliefs and you'll probably play better than if you're constantly worrying about them.
Mm-hmm. And I'll have the links to these books in the show notes, so all the listeners can go and start studying more. But now I'm very excited in hearing what you are working on at the moment and the direction that your thinking has been taking around these themes. Okay,
so again, I'm going to recommend another book, not one of my books. There's a fantastic book called The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was written by a guy called Stephen Pressfield. It was written in 1995 and it was made into a film in the year 2000. And unfortunately, the film's not very good. So because the film wasn't very good, I didn't read the book for the next 20 years. And it proved to be one of the, having said I don't regret anything, I really regret not reading that book earlier. It's an absolutely fantastic book. It's a novel, so it's a work of fiction. But it's based on the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the foundational Hindu texts. And it's basically everything that I point to in my coaching and in my work. But because it's a novel, it's kind of what I was saying about sometimes it's easier to understand and really get this stuff through metaphor and through story and through allegory rather than actually through logic and reason. So I'd highly recommend that to any golfer or indeed any professional sports person, because it's an easy read. It's entertaining as well as being absolutely spot on in terms of what it's pointing to philosophically. So yeah, that's my project at the moment is writing a little bit about that book and trying to help people understand it, because you read it once and you think it's a nice story and it might make you feel a bit better about your golf, but there's so many different layers to it that we can get into in terms of those three big questions: who am I, what's the nature of reality, and what's the meaning of life? All of those questions are addressed in it. So as you would expect from something that's based on a philosophical text that's been around for at least 3,000 years. It's, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the one of the finest bits of writing, philosophically that you can read. So
yeah, and when will we see this work published from you? What's the timeline?
You're putting me on the spot now, Nora. I'm not sure. I'm hoping to get something out. It might not be a book about the book. It might just be some sort of coaching. Trying to think of the right word. Some sort of coaching package based on it. And I'm writing another book, which will be the sort of third in the series of the golf books that I've written. So obviously 3 Principles and then Take Relief. The one that I've sort of been working on for about a year now, but haven't finished. That'll be the third in that series. So just taking my ideas on to where they are now, just bringing them up to date, really.
That's wonderful. I have very much enjoyed our discussion. It's been
me too. Thank you for inviting me.
Inspiring. It has been thought-provoking as well, and that's always important. That coming out from discussions in a way that I need to find out more and I need to read more, and that's something that I need to consider. So let's finish up with a few thoughts to what are some of your take-home messages and some of the things that you would like to lift from what we have discussed. If the listeners can remember 1 or 2 things from this, what would you like that to be?
Just spend some time with those 3 questions. And if you want to explore them further, there's some sort of loads of stuff out there now in terms of books, and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, a lot of podcasts. What it's commonly referred to as non-duality. This idea that there are not 2 things going on. There is one thing going on. So you might want to look up Rupert Spira. Is a very good teacher on this, and his teacher is a guy called Francis Lucille, who I particularly like listening to. They've both got lots of stuff on YouTube and on podcasts. I think they've got websites as well. And if you're of a more scientific sort of, you prefer a more scientific approach, there's a very good philosopher called Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who again has written about 10 or 11 books over the last 10 years. Exploring philosophy of mind and consciousness. And I think he's done lots and lots of podcasts over the last sort of 6-8 months, because he's had a couple of books come out in the last year or so. So, I'd certainly recommend you having a look at those. Just take some time to explore those 3 questions yourself. Just sit with them and see what happens, really.
Yeah, I think these are really wonderful closing words and pointing some directions for our listeners to continue this journey on exploring these ideas. And again, I would really recommend checking out the books that we talked about your work that you've done, and you have a website as well. You can again repeat that so the listeners can go and check that out?
I have 2 websites. So my golf website is samjarmangolf.com, and then the website that I write about other sports and coaching is sportsprinciples.com.
Yeah, and so there will be loads of more resources, and for example, this article on mental health in sport can be found in Sports Principles, and I recommend to take a look if you're interested in that theme. So once again, it has really been an honor and inspirational discussion. So many thanks, Sam, for joining me, and enjoy your golf later today.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in this show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcast or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.